and welcome to Pique My Interest, a podcast dedicated to creativity. My name is Scoob Decker, and I am an artist, and your host. Pique My Interest is an exploration in meeting some incredible artists, learning about their craft and exploring what makes them create. As a kid growing up in Michigan, this next artist was always drawn to nature and wilderness. With his exploration into the supernatural connection to the world, Matthew Venus became a creative witch. This episode touches on the many subcategories of witchcraft, from potions, spells, to tarot readings. But this artist specializes in creating spirit vessels. Witchcraft is not about being spooky, but about being closer and connected to the metaphysical. Witches have a way of connecting to other than human spirits, and Matthew specializes in creating vessels that can host a spirit, which is kind of like making a body or a house for someone who doesn't have one. And Matthew dives into how he finds these spirits, and how he creates these unique and diverse vessels, and chats about the crossroads of art and magic. Matthew brings an insight of positive education of witchcraft with open arms, and tries to find balance in the world with his apothecary. This episode was recorded on December 9th, outside spooky Salem, Massachusetts. I hope you look up his work and your interest is piqued. I hope you're having a grand day, and please enjoy this week's episode I've titled after the apothecary, Spiritus Arcanum. Hello, and welcome to Pique My Interest. I'm currently just outside Salem, Massachusetts, sitting in a spiritual apothecary with an amazing artist. How are you doing today?
I'm doing very well, thank you so much.
Have you done anything interesting lately?
Well, lately, at the time we're recording this, I am currently gearing up for a big event that we're going to be hosting. I'm a part of the Salem Witchcraft and Folklore Festival, and we do markets throughout the year. So we have a big market coming up this Saturday where we're going to have a lot of artists, a bunch of different vendors. We're going to have Krampus there, so people can take photographs with Krampus, and psychic readers, and just some really talented makers that are largely local and some from throughout the country. So I've been working a lot on that. Yeah.
Fantastic. And please introduce yourself. What is your name and where are you from?
My name is Matthew Venus. I live in Salem, Massachusetts. And to put it kind of shortly, I tend to describe myself as an animist, an artist, a folk magician, and witch.
Mm-hmm. And then I'll just have to ask the question, what is your craft?
My craft, I would say, in a nutshell, is witchcraft.
Yes.
But for me, that is very intimately tied to artistry as well.
Oh, fantastic. I'm sure we'll get into that. And what is your specialty within witchcraft?
I would say that my specialty tends to be more broadly creating spirit vessels. There's a lot of elements within witchcraft that I am pretty well skilled at, but the heart of my practice would fall into what I would consider creating spirit vessels. So we can get a little bit more into what exactly that means and the breadth of what that can mean. But that would be my speciality.
And what makes your work different than other witches? Or do witches have specific specialties?
Yeah, the world of magic or occultism or witchcraft or neo-paganism really is vast. There's a lot of areas that people could be specialists within, whether this be doing protective work or doing healing work or astrology or reading tarot or creating herbal creations, doing herbal healing or creating oils and incenses. So a lot of people do have different areas with speciality and different areas of focus. And so this happens to be one of the areas that I would consider myself a specialist within.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And that is?
The creation of Enspirited objects, really.
Okay, awesome. And what's your background? Do you have any education in witchcraft?
So I've been studying magic and witchcraft since I was about 12 years old. I like to say I was very much a witchy child from long before then. But it wasn't until I was around 12 when I found out, oh, wait, there's an actual, traceable history of magic and magical practitioners that accompanies humanity throughout most of its existence. And from that point forward, I was diving in head first. So I've been studying and learning and eventually teaching within this craft since I was about 12 years old is when I started.
Mm-hmm. Fantastic. And we all know that the origins of witchcraft is in the Salem area, but you're from Michigan. What really piqued your interest about witchcraft, and what really got you going into it?
So, witchcraft is something that, depending upon how we define what that means, right, is something that really, as a term, originates, in Europe, more in the medieval period and onward. But what that means can really vary from one person to the next. For me, though, growing up in Michigan as a child, I was very much a nature lover. I feel like when I was bored or looking for things to do, I was always really drawn towards either going out into nature and I could get lost doing nature walks in like the local woods, or I grew up on a lake and so would walk around the lake and kind of engage with all of the wildlife and the plants. I would either do that when I was bored, or I would usually do something creative and artistic. So for me, those things are in my definition, quite magical and pretty witchy. For me, a big part of my witchcraft rests, I often say that it's kind of built around a heart of animism. So.
Heart of animism. I love that. And then we're currently sitting in your apothecary, Spiritus Arcanum. To me, that's success. You've got your own shop. You're doing the witchcraft within the Salem area. Do you consider yourself successful? What really got you succeeding in your craft? And what is success in witchcraft?
That's such a good question. I guess I would consider myself successful. I mean, in the sense that 12-year-old child that really was, drawn towards witchcraft and magic would die to see like where we are now. I wanted to create, with the shop in particular, I wanted to create the kind of space that truly expressed what magic is to me, but also the type of place that a 12-year-old me would have absolutely thought was heaven. And I think that I've been successful at that. And I feel as though through a lot of my work in this world, I've been able to create a positive impact on people that I have had as either clients or customers or friends or students. And that, to me, I think is really the true measure of success. Being able to put food on my table is great. Having people respond positively to the things I put into the world, I think, is success too. Feeling like you have some level of like impact and influence, but really ultimately feeling like that impact is meaningful in the lives of people. That is the measure of success for me. So far, I've been thankful to feel successful in those ways.
Yeah, I think just saying this area is cool is just scratching the surface. I mean, the second I walked in here, I had this big smile on my face because over here we have tarot cards, oracle cards, we have potions, we have candles, we have all sorts of almost voodoo-like stuff. And it's very, as we said, we're in December right now and it's holiday themed right now, so I appreciate that. So I just want to say thank you for following your passion and being able to share this with everybody in a way that is heartfelt, and it's less harsh, and it's less this is witchy and we're dark. This is very opening.
I feel like I'm not an individual who's afraid of kind of the dark and macabre. Like I feel like that is very much a part of life, and there's beauty within that as well. But that being said, I like to maintain a reasonable balance. As you can see, like behind you, we have an altar to Santa Muerte, who is essentially a folk saint, but better known as Saint Death. And, she's not there just to be spooky. It's also about recognizing that death is a part of all of our existences, right? It's a part of life, and it's that memento mori type of thing, right? Understanding, having a positive relationship with our own death. So I think sometimes within witchcraft, we have an opportunity to perhaps more openly explore things that perhaps in other parts of culture are seen as harmful or negative or evil, but they're actually just a part of our natural process and the natural existence. And I think that most witchcraft traditions celebrate those things kind of fearlessly, as opposed to denying the human experience and the human condition, kind of celebrating that and finding empowerment through recognizing all of those points on the path, whether they're historically seen as bright and light, or seen as things that may be more difficult. We grow through kind of confronting our fears or our mortality, right?
Yeah. The more I talk to witches in my life, I start to realize that their viewpoints and their ways of life definitely make a lot of sense. Like, there's nothing to Margaret Hamilton from Wizard of Oz. There's not to anything scary about it. Most of your life standpoints really make sense.
I do think that as a philosophical, spiritual, or magical framework, that witchcraft is much more humanist than perhaps other things that you might see.
Yeah.
Whilst also being, I guess, also for me at least, being very animist. It's not human-centric,
right?
But humanist, I guess, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. And let's get into your creation process. Pique our interest. What are spirit vessels, and what do you do with them?
So, spirit vessel is really any type of a material object that is connected to or believed to function as a focal point or a locus, if you will, or a house or body for those things which are disembodied or disincarnate. So what we might refer to as a spirit, right? For me, generally, the best way I tend to describe spirit is we all have spirits in our own little meat suits. Like, that's our spirit vessel for what we are. But for those that don't have a body, the way I would tend to describe spirits in that way is that a disembodied, generally a pattern of consciousness that, when engaged as a person or with personhood, it will generally respond as such, as long as we have the capabilities and cognitive and sensory abilities to engage with that. And I think that's something that witches are developed, either naturally inclined towards doing or developed towards doing, that having that skill set of, whether you want to call it psychic ability or mediumship or different forms of divination, but ways of kind of connecting with those other than human disembodied beings.
Mm-hmm. And so how do you find these connections? Do they speak to you? Do you have to go search for them?
It can be both. It can be either or both. For me, it has been both. There are sometimes where it's like certain things will come to me in dreams, or I do a lot of what might commonly be understood by folks as like astral projection, perhaps, but I tend to refer to it, and within the kind of traditional craft communities I'm a part of, we usually refer to that as spirit flight. So sometimes this can also be seen as like sometimes called like shamanic journeying and things like that. But so sometimes it'll be slipping out of my body and going to the other world through like these processes and engaging with spirits in that way. Sometimes it can be literally through utilizing forms of divination, whether it is like for some it might be tarot. For me, I do a lot of what's called bone throwing, which is casting of a lot of different items, and the way that they fall is read. There's various different methodologies, though, that are utilized for kind of communicating with and developing relationships with spirits, whether you go seeking them out or they pop up. It could be either, It's almost like people. Sometimes you get on an app to meet new people, and sometimes, people just walk into your life and you make a connection,
Yeah. So once we get these spiritual vessels, what then do we do with them?
So these spirit vessels too, and so we have some here on the table that you can see, and some of these are ceramic sculptural pieces, some of them are bottles, some of them are boxes or masks and things like that. So essentially what we really are creating here is a physical body, right? A material body for something that does not have one. And so in that process, it is this co-creative artistic process where you are attempting to kind of create something that is resonant with whatever this being is that it's meant to kind of be tied to or represent. The way that they tend to be utilized is a point of power, right? And sometimes it could be as simple as creating an effigy or a figure that is meant to be representative of a protective spirit. And in that process, it is this co-creative process where usually I'm trying to make something that aesthetically is somewhat reflective of this spirit or this being, but also once it's done, you can see, like, for instance, with some of these ceramic pieces, they're usually I leave a large opening at the bottom, whereas like this might then be further empowered by being filled with all sorts of different magical materia, so things like herbs or roots or stones or dirts or all sorts of things, where it would be completed, and then through various processes you align it to, you consecrate it to that spirit. And it becomes a point of focus for it. So let's say that it was made for protection. You might put it by a front door. You might occasionally like burn a stick of incense, right, as kind of an offering to help feed and empower that force or that spirit. You might light a candle near it. That can be one of the ways that these things can be worked with. Also, Enspirited objects could be smaller. They can be almost something that you carry on your person to bring the influence of whatever that particular spirit is. Maybe it's something that's going to help you kind of achieve success in your career or find good fortune or personal protection. Again, there's a lot of different ways that these things can function, and we don't necessarily fully see this as like the only body of that spirit where it's fully reliant upon it. If the statue were to break, usually the spirit is
Right.
okay to some extent, depending upon how much it's tethered and what kind of spirit we're talking about. But they tend to be focal points to either bring the influence of what that spirit is more into our sphere, to anchor it a little bit more into our sphere, or to be a point of focus. So if you think almost of like devotional objects or statuary and things like that, to me, to some extent, even like the altar at a Catholic church, right, becomes a form of spirit vessel, particularly even in that moment of like transubstantiation that happens as a part of the Eucharist. The spirit is touching upon that space. It's a locus for the spirit to kind of engage. And so even that might be seen as kind of that shrines, are spirit vessels. But spirit vessels can also be statuaries, puppets, boxes, bottles, bags, anything that is tied to a spirit force, and it can function through and somewhat functions either as kind of a chair for that spirit to sit within or a locus for us to interact with that power, if that makes sense.
While you're communicating or discovering, exploring vessels, how often can a spirit adapt, change, be able to say, this isn't the right object, I need something else? Or once they're encapsulated, are they able to transfer to another vessel, the one that makes more sense to them?
I think that all kind of varies a little bit, right? That's almost... one of the best ways that I tend to put this down is that spirits are people too. It doesn't mean they're human, but they're people too, in the sense that they can have their own proclivities and likes and dislikes. So it's hard to like have a blanket statement about anything, right? There are plant spirits, there are spirits of locations, there are spirits of, the dead, there are fairy spirits, there's all sorts of ways that we might classify spirits. And this may vary from one person to the next, but for me, I oftentimes will either kind of engage with spirits through kind of more mediumistic, which is kind of inner hearing, or spirit flight type of things, but also forms of divination. Like, so I have certain forms of like engaging with divination, so like that provide me with like yes, no, maybe answers. And that can be really helpful because I'm like, does this all look good? Like, is this what we want to go with? And I can get like a yes, no, maybe. If it's a maybe, it's like, okay, so that's like kind of it. Does something need to be added? Does something need to be removed? Do we want more of this? Same thing where like if I was choosing things to go into a vessel to further empower it, like herbs or stones and things like that, utilizing divination to kind of have that conversation, basically like, oh, do you like this? Is there something that we need to change or whatever? And so that's a part of the co-creative process. But I also think, for me at least, in the process of making it, oftentimes feels like a somewhat mediumistic process in the sense that my hands are not my own, like not solely my own, that it is co-creative. So if I'm sculpting something, sometimes it's a matter of not really having a full vision of what is going to be the end product, but allowing it to be a co-creative process. And for me, that is, it's kind of a half in, half out of my body type of a perspective, where it's me and me plus, me in conversation with something other than me. And so sometimes that is the process, and I might at the end of it double check and be like, do we like this? We feel good about this, and kind of go from there. So it's an interesting
but the constant communication and the constant openness, I love that. And that's very similar to other art forms as well. I've learned with this podcast, it's incredibly difficult just to do anything by yourself. And I can only imagine in witchcraft you have to have some spirits to at least tell you what they want and what they need.
Very much so from my perspective in witchcraft. And that's the thing in contemporary witchcraft, it's actually it's such a broad thing. And there's so many different, there's no grand authority of witchcraft, right? And so that what that word means to different people can mean very different things, and their approaches can be very different. Some people are very energy centered, like it's about their own energy and how they're projecting their energy and their intention and these things. And that's all fine. And maybe there's a small part of that in my own practice, but mine is very spirit centered in the sense that, like I said, I'm an animist at heart, meaning that I think that the dirt, the trees, the stones, but also all of our, even our man-made things, our art supplies, you know, the paint, the clay, all of these things have kind of an inherent spirit to them that we can kind of couple with. And so it's interesting oftentimes making spirit vessels or fetish objects, as I also tend to refer to them, because it becomes almost a chimeric process of all of the disparate parts that bring their own kind of little tweak of personality, their own kind of spirit, into creating a new form that didn't exist prior. And so we're almost like birthing something. I mean, this is the artistic process, really, in a lot of ways, is birthing something into the world that didn't exist prior to that, right? And so for me, art and magic are intrinsically paired, because if I were to describe and say you have a concept of a thing that you want to see manifest in the world, and so you pull together your tools and implements that you need to make this happen and engage in a process that we might call a ritual process to manifest something into the world that didn't exist prior but was a vision or a desire that you had for something that you wanted to see in this world. And am I describing art or am I describing magic? Those are, to me, very intrinsically linked, you know.
Absolutely.
It is that process for me.
Well, thank you for opening my eyes to that in my mind. That's, wow, interesting. And what gets your creative juices flowing? What inspires you?
It's interesting. Sometimes, you know, I think for anyone that deals in inspiration or is open to it, you know, sometimes it's that 2 a.m. thing where all of a sudden, you know, you just get this spark. And for me, that in and of itself oftentimes feels like a magical thing, right? It's like this, so literally I'm working on a book currently, and I talk about inspiration in the book, and the terminology inspiration comes from like the same root word as Spiritus Arcanum, spirit, and Spiritus, which also speaks to spirits, right? But also breath. And an inspiration oftentimes means like to be breathed into. So for me, that is oftentimes about almost like being breathed into by, whether we want to call it like my higher self or holy guardian angel or the spirits that I work with, almost whispered into your being and inspired. And it's a little spark that shows up for you. And you can work on turning that spark into a fire, right? Or you could be like, well, that's a neat idea, I'm going to file that away. And then like 3 months later, you see that someone else did exactly what you were thinking about doing. Because as a friend of mine, Laura Tempest Zakharoff, likes to say, the muses are slutty. And if you don't act on an inspiration or an idea, a lot of times, soon enough, you'll find they moved on to someone else. So there's a bit of that process, right? So I get inspired by all sorts of things. It could be, you know, just something that comes to me. It could be a need or a desire, right? It could be, I mean, I get inspired by the books I read, or the movies I encounter, or conversations I have with people might lead to a new idea. So I just try to be open to a lot of things. But sometimes I would really say that a lot of times it feels like what I am inspired to do or create is very much spirit-led, you know?
When you leave the shop, do you tend to turn off your witchness, or is it constantly going 24/7?
It is that.
Yeah.
It is constant. Yeah, I think that honestly, I think once you've really turned on the witch switch, once you've really kind of viewed the world through a magical lens, you can't really turn that off.
Right.
It influences and is intertwined with everything, but because of that, you see how magic intertwines with philosophy, with science, with biology, with ecology, with artistry. For me, it's like when you view the world through magical eyes, everything is magical. And you also tend to find that it is in fact magical. That artistry, when you think about the concept, like I just said, that we speak about inspiration, but what does inspiration truly mean? Where does it come from? To be breathed into. And there is a magic within that. So I'm a person who loves etymology, and you'll find a lot of kind of hints in the meanings of words and how those things develop. But yeah, no, it never really turns off. I think that is, regardless of whether or not you are actively in a ritual space or actively engaging in what might be viewed as witchcraft, I think that most witches view the world through witching eyes. Yeah.
Well, I guess there's magic everywhere, not just in the shop.
There is. And that, I think, is, there's not always this division between what is mundane or material and magical. No, for me, it's all intertwined. And particularly when viewed through an animist lens, everything is spirit, everything is magical.
So in a world that is almost unpredictably magical, how do you overcome a creative block?
For me, there's a couple different ways. I will look at other art that I like. I will look at, art from different cultures or what contemporary artists are creating, and sometimes that will be a way of overcoming that, or potentially reading mythology. For me, it can also take the form of, literally, like I was speaking of earlier, doing ritual forms or engaging in spirit flight, just to kind of see what brings it up. And additionally, sometimes I will just sit in my workspace with a lump of clay and play with it until something wants to kind of reveal itself. There are times where I've developed, like, for instance, like this figure and this figure are both what I would say kind of this co-creative mediumistic form, where I had no image of what they were going to be when I started, and I allowed something to kind of speak to me through it and reveal to me in that process, like, who are you? What are you? And do I want to bring you into this? Do I want to give you a body? There are some of those things that happen, and sometimes I think that just playing, allowing yourself to play, is, I think, huge. I think it is a powerful, artistic, inspirational, and truly magical thing that we need to allow ourselves the space to do.
I think it's interesting that through witchcraft, your craft, you've, through exploring playing with other materials and supplies, have explored ceramics and painting. And the title of my season 2 is Art Inspires Art. And then, so I completely understand and believe what you were experiencing. And while you're making these, what hobbies do you have? Is there anything that takes you away from the witchcraft that might help you in the future? Are these hobbies complementary or contradictory to your craft?
I think that, honestly, the hobbies that I have will all inevitably become magical, or I will find the magical connection to them. Do you know what I mean? I think that, I enjoy... I enjoy creating art in various forms. So sometimes it's beading and doing jewelry making. Sometimes it's needle felting. Sometimes it's embroidery or sewing or painting or sculpting, or, all of these different things. Those actually kind of are my hobbies in a lot of ways. Those things. And then I also just like going out and being in nature when I can. And so those things, I think, for me, are that. I'm trying to think, what other hobbies do I have? I mean, the thing that probably allows me most to turn my brain off from all of it, because it is interesting, when being a witch is your vocation, it's still work at times. Work is work. Do you know what I mean? And I love what I do, and I feel very privileged that this is what my place and role is in this life, But, sometimes it's nice to sit down and play, The Witcher and play video games for like 3 hours to kind of, but you never know, again, from things like media where you might find inspiration, So I would probably say my least witchy probably hobby would be like maybe video games, but that's really, I only allow myself that on rare occasions, because those things can be very time consuming. And it's like, maybe when it's winter months and I don't have a lot else going on. Traditionally I don't. This year I do. But.
Well, speaking of being an artist is also being a business person.
Yeah.
Would you recommend going to school for witchcraft? Are there schools out there besides Hogwarts? Or would you recommend going and finding a more seasoned witch to become an apprentice?
I think that we live in a really interesting time for people that are maybe interested in learning about magic and witchcraft, because with social media and also with like on-demand printing and even just like AI published books and things like that, it's so hard to know what is a good and reliable source. And there's also so many variant opinions, you know. So it's hard to say there's like a specific place that you can go to learn things. I think that it's best for if someone is drawn towards magic or witchcraft, one of the first things that, when they're like, well, how do I start? One of the first things I tend to ask them is like, well, what do you like? Like, what are you interested in? Like, do you find tarot interesting? Do you find like herbs and plants interesting? Do you find healing or working with animals interesting? Do you find meditation interesting? Do you like crystals? Do you like, you know, do you like art? What are these things? Because there's avenues for all of that. So I think it's really about finding what, when you think of magic, when you think of witchcraft, when you think about your desire to learn these things, what do you envision, right, for yourself? And that is a starting point as far as like where you might look for classes. There's a lot of classes online and things like that of varying, you know, some are probably better than others, just with anything. There are a lot of books out there. Some, again, are better than others. So I think that those are decent places to start. You know, try to use certain levels of discernment. And at first, I would actually say, to some extent, diversify your sources, you know. There's no one quite as sure as a witch who's been at it for 2 to 5 years, meaning that a lot of times they've learned a lot from oftentimes not that many sources, but they are very sure that this, you know, is the way, quote unquote, that it is, or the way that witchcraft or magic functions. And I've been at this point in my life over 30 years, and all I can tell you is that there's no such thing as one way or the way. Yeah. There are many different ways, and the most important way is the one which actively and ideally verifiably works for you and has a positive impact on your personhood and feels like what you're meant to be doing. And that's going to look different for different people. So that's all I can really say is, you know, is that yes, you can find some teachers out there, and, you know, again, don't ever trust anyone that tells you that their way is the way, or that there is one way. That's probably my best advice. You know, think for yourself, question authority, be inquisitive, and head towards the light that you're drawn towards.
And I would say you probably have impacted numerous lives around here, as well as piqued the interest of people who might not know a lot about witchcraft. But after doing this for 30 years, I'm sure that you've gotten some people who just don't understand it.
Sure.
How do you handle criticism?
I mean, I generally, so if I get a criticism about my belief system, I don't really care. Like, I don't need someone else's approval of what I believe. Like, that's okay. And I also understand, I'm not so, like, you know, disconnected from reality that I don't understand how, to the average person, if I say, no, there's a spirit in this pair of scissors that I'm going to work with and incorporate it into this work, because the spirit of the scissors is going to be a part of the whole that has to do with cutting things away, with removing things, you know. And so this is a form of, like, animist approach that maybe people might not fully get on board with. Yeah, we can see that as a spirit. It just depends on your opinion of what a spirit is. But at least from an artistic, symbolic perspective, you get what I'm driving at there, right? You get the language I'm using, right? And some of the influence there. But by and large, I don't, whether it's from within the magical community, because there's a lot of varying opinions there within the magical community and witchcraft community, or from without, I don't need or necessarily seek others' approval for what I believe, because I never once in my life have attempted to try to impose my beliefs upon another, really. So I don't need theirs on mine, I guess is the thing. But I also get to the average person, my life, I have to remind myself sometimes that I live a very different life, a very, very different life to the average person. And there's nothing like, I don't know, a family reunion or something like that to occasionally remind me of that. But I'm like, oh, I have very different concerns and a very different social circle and a very different outlook to the average person. So that's okay. I understand that you know, not everyone gets it. They don't necessarily need to. That's all right. I don't, you know, I'm not trying to proselytize. I'm not evangelical about my beliefs or my approach. They're meaningful to me, and they contribute, they enrich my life, right? But I will say, as far as criticism, period, I think whenever we're criticized, we have an opportunity to see, did that upset me because there's a truth within it? And is that truth coming from a source that I actually care about the opinion of? And so we have an opportunity maybe to be like, oh, well, maybe I can learn from that critique. Or is that critique just something that's mean and bad faith and whatever? In which case, like, that's cool. That says more about them than me. And like, it doesn't really affect me. You know, it's that whole, your boos mean nothing to me. I've seen what you applaud type of a thing. So, I appreciate critiques from people whose opinions I value.
No,
Yeah.
that's very admirable. I thank you for once again, your open-mindedness and your willingness to share but not push. I love that. And now it's time to clear the air. Is there any misconceptions about being a witch?
Oh, there are plenty, I'm sure. It just depends on, it depends on who you're asking. I think there are people that call themselves witches that have a lot of misconceptions about what it means to be a witch. But again, it's not my job to define for other people what a witch means to them. That's a silly thing to waste one's time on. But I think there's plenty of misconceptions. But I think probably the biggest one for the average person that has no kind of frame of reference for this is that one, that it's all just like make-believe and LARPing, and that we somehow believe that, like, we actually believe in like Harry Potter style magic, if you will, or most people's exposure to magic or witchcraft and occultism and things like that is through popular media. So either fantasy films or horror films. And so I think some people think that that's what we think we're doing, when no, like, you have to demonstrate things in a special effects kind of way to make it entertaining, right? But I don't think that most practitioners have an idea that that is what we're doing. The other part of it that I would also say, though, is that magic and spirit work and witchcraft has a much deeper history than I think the average person understands. And that, for me, particularly an animist approach towards spirit work is humanity's earliest connection to the people that are non-human around us. And it is also, to me, the origins of a lot of our artwork comes from animist perspectives from our Paleolithic ancestors. A couple of little points I'll say here is a point of reference to two particular sculptural pieces. One is the Lowenmensch, or the Lion Man, which is a early Paleolithic or upper Paleolithic mammoth ivory sculpture that was found, I want to say it was in the early 1900s. It wasn't until I think the 1970s it was actually pieced back together, and they were like, oh, this is a figure. It's a therianthropic figure with a lion's head and a man's body. But it is, to date, our earliest undisputed sculptural piece that was ever made by human hands. And it represents something that doesn't exist in our world. It represents a being with a lion's head and a man's body, or a human's body. To me, if you look at cross-culturally, therianthropes are the ways that we oftentimes depict spirits or deities and things like that. So the earliest example we have of a human sculpture, or human-made sculpture, to me is a spirit vessel. It is an object intended to give body to something that was otherwise not existent in this world. And so for me, that is magical. That is animism. I will call it at least magical. I will call it animist. Some might choose to call that a form of witchcraft, conjuring forth spirits into form, right? And so to me, I feel like there's a seed in what I do, and there's a seed in my practice that goes back to our earliest expressions of humanity. And so to me, magic is the birthright of all of us. Inspiration is tied to being breathed into by the other world or the unseen.
Yeah. I mean, when I walked in, I did say that Salem was the birthplace of witchcraft, but that's just American witchcraft, and it predates Christianity by just a few years, I think.
Yes, it depends, and again, it depends on what we're defining as witchcraft, right? Because magic, I would say, has existed as long as humanity has. Witchcraft becomes a terminology that gets applied to certain forms of magic later.
I mean, there's the pagans, there's all sorts of connections to the spiritual world.
Yeah. Oftentimes, witchcraft becomes an accusation for people engaging with spirits in the way that the church doesn't agree with unsanctioned spirits becomes to traffic. Oftentimes, what people were accused of when they're accused of being witches was, in fact, trafficking with spirits, and those are spirits that the church didn't approve of. So, it might have been okay to work with saints or angels when Catholicism was popular, but once you get into Protestantism, nothing can be trusted. Everything's an evil spirit. The age of miracles is over. So anyone who claims to traffic with any type of a spirit is potentially at risk of being labeled a witch. So if we're going to make a little bit of a jump as that someone who consorts with spirits and traffics with spirits as a witch, then I'd say I pretty accurately fit that descriptor.
Well, I would say a major misconception are witches are evil or wicked, and I can tell you that is not true. And the other one that I was curious about that I wanted to ask you is witchcraft an art form. And I will say I consider it extremely creative, and I think it's very collaborative. And what I've learned in this interview is that you, through witchcraft, experience different art forms, but I've also learned that it is in itself its own art form.
Yes, I fully believe that. I think particularly, at least for me, in the way that I understand experience and would personally define witchcraft, we refer to it as the magical art oftentimes, or magical arts. For me, that it is an art form. Art and crafting, talk about witchcraft and the craft, there is often a creative element to this. And for me, they are intrinsically tied. Witchcraft is art, and art can be witchcraft. Art is magic to me, period. And so witchcraft is a form of art. And some would also make the argument that, or want to make the argument that witchcraft is a science as well. I don't really care here or there whether or not people view us as whether or not we are terribly scientific, but I do believe in science. But I'm an artist at heart. So.
And then, just off the top of your head, any funny or interesting stories that have happened with your craft recently?
Oh, give me a second. Any funny or interesting stories?
Has anybody walked in here requesting something so odd that you've just been baffled?
I will tell you that, I've definitely had some strange experiences as someone who's kind of in the public eye or a shop owner in the realm of witchcraft, because you do, I would say at least monthly, we get some interesting requests or calls and things like that. Probably one of the more interesting requests that I've had in recent years was an individual who very wholeheartedly wanted me to perform some type of a ritual or spell on him to shrink him down into small, tiny form. And I had to tell him that that doesn't exist in my skill set. and so, if I come across someone who I find it does, I will be incredibly impressed. But that's not a part of, my particular purview. A lot of times what it is that we tend to encounter, again, is people whose understanding of magic and witchcraft is largely informed by horror movies or fantasy films, and that seem to truly believe that we're able to do X, Y, and Z. And magic can do amazing and beautiful things, and I've seen that in my life, but
shrinking somebody down
like
Wonka vision,
yes. indeed we're not there yet. We're working on it. So
hopefully some science can match with some witchcraft and we can figure it out together.
Eventually one of these days it will be Honey, I Shrunk the Kids.
And what's next for the world of your craft, witchcraft? Are there any new categories? Are there any new explorations within witchcraft?
I think that, I really think that ultimately magic is a reflective of the times in which it exists. Otherwise, it is anachronistic and unnecessary. Otherwise, it really loses any type of relevance. That's true of, I think, any spiritual practice or religion. And so I think that currently, a lot of witchcraft tends to be reflective of human rights, protecting the marginalized, protecting the earth and the ecology of the earth. I think most witches are concerned with these things. And so I think that is an area where our focus and our energies are always best spent currently. And I think that, we do live we're continually technologically evolving. And I think that the craft does continue to show that. I mean, witchcraft on TikTok is huge. I don't personally like a lot of what I see on TikTok, but that's okay. That's okay. There's a lot of people that are coming into their own understandings of witchcraft and magic through that vehicle. So we'll see. My hope is I have a book that's coming out, or maybe at the time that this airs, it will already be out, called Ensouling the Effigy, and I'm hoping that what we'll see is not that I'm the only person doing this work, but I do think that it being a major focus and heart of my art and my craft, that passion will hopefully spill out to other individuals, and that we'll see more and more of this particular kind of work within contemporary witchcraft, because I think that it's an area that deserves greater exploration within what we might call, kind of the Anglophone or quote unquote Western magical traditions, because we do find a lot more creation of spirit vessels and fetishes and things like that, I think, more regularly in some other magical practices in other parts of the world. And I think it's something that deserves greater investigation, experimentation, and creative inspiration tied into it for people, because I think it can be a truly enriching process both for us and for the spirits that we might work with in our individual practices.
Yeah, my next question was going to be, what's next for you personally?
Oh, well, there we
just
go.
Explain the book, and I'm so excited when that comes out. I need to get my hands on it.
Yeah,
where else can we see your work?
So the book is going to be out through Crossed Crow Books, and so you can find that it's called Ensouling the Effigy, which is Art of Enspirited Objects. That's also available. It should be on Amazon and those places. You can find me, spiritusarcanum.com. That's SPIRITUSARCANUM. Is our website with the shop and things like that. I do occasionally do releases of artwork and things like that. I have a Patreon that I'm terrible at being any level of active on, so don't necessarily find me there. But you can also find me on Instagram at Spiritus_Arcanum. And my shop here in Peabody, which is, we're just outside of Salem, so we're like right on the edge of Salem, and so we have our physical shop here. And I would say I'm hoping to be doing a lot of kind of touring around the country, showing up at different pagan and occult conferences. I organize a conference here in Salem called the Salem Witchcraft and Folklore Festival, in conjunction with my good friend Jackie. And so we do that. It's going to be in August of 2025. We usually do it in August, so it's August 19th through the 24th, and it's awesome. We have magical practitioners, whether they're practicing in witchcraft or folk magic. A lot of these people, this is what they do for a vocation. It is their cultural heritage, and or a lot of them are coming from academic, but also practitioner backgrounds together. So I think we have just an incredible caliber of individuals coming through to bring a lot of perspectives on traditional and contemporary magic and witchcraft. And we also have a lot of really fun things, like we have a giant cabaret party in a market, and this last year we did a film screening and panel discussion for The Wicker Man. We'll have another film screening this year. I don't know what movie we're going to land on yet, but usually it's something that has magical themes and that we discuss. So there's a lot of great things there. And so you can find that at salemwitchfest.com.
Incredible. I can't thank you enough for joining me and piquing my interest about witchcraft and inviting me into Spiritus Arcanum. This is a beautiful shop. I am so excited. I have the joy after this interview. I get to go wander around and explore and pick something out that I get to take home with me. Is there anything else that you'd like to say before we wrap up?
The last things I'll say, one other little point of promotion, if you find this interesting, pick up the book, but also I do classes through my website, so look forward to that. But the main thing I would like to say is be curious, try to look at the world as being inspirited, whatever that means to you, and living in kind of community with all of the variant kind of spirits that are around us, whether it's the spirit of the tree in your backyard or the spirit of your favorite paintbrush, and let yourself be inspired by that, and let your creativity bring birth to forms which otherwise did not exist in this realm.
Thank you. And thank you to all my peekers out there. Please let me know if you know of any special or unique artists or art forms you think I should explore. I'm currently in Salem, Massachusetts, and can't wait to see where Pique My Interest takes me next. Remember, creativity comes from the heart. Push yourselves, be kind to each other. I'm Scoob Decker, and thank you for helping me pique my interest.
Thank you so much for having me.